Hi again, class. In the first couple of chapters, the first couple of pages, even on feature writing for newspapers, and I think it's very interesting that the more that we develop feature writing, we understand that feature writing is not simply for magazines, it's also for newspapers. People engage feature writing for blogs and all other sorts of mediums, but increasingly in our world, feature writing has really taken off as pivotal in newspapers. News features have become very popular in the past decade or so, as people want more than just a straight news story. They want more than just the Dan Rather bringing you the evening news tonight. There is a place and time for that. But in order to engage people, and it could be because there is overkill on the 24/7 news channels that repeat the news over and over and over, they want more. They want a more developed story. They have more questions about what and why and how. And so they people have more of an interest and more of a curiosity. And so some people would say, well, that's more lending itself to more of the entertainment weekly. And certainly there are entertainment stories that fit into that feature category. But there is also this need, because we have more information out there with the internet, for people to have more details, more description, more vividness. I mean, just look at the bookshelf in back of me. Look at the color. Look at the different fonts employed. Um, Look at the different shapes of the books. Now, compare that to a bookshelf maybe even 30 or 40 years ago, where, and I could illustrate one, or you could just think of maybe a library or a bookshelf where most of the books would have been about the same size or height. The book jackets would have been brown, gray, light blue. Everything would have been pretty homogeneous. Now everything is so colorful and different and vivid, and it's like we want to have that difference. We want to have that uniqueness. Same thing with stories, and we want to have those details that pop out, that make the story unique. It's kind of the idea that everyone has their own story. So as feature writers, that's what we do. And we don't make the story, we discover the story. So if you look at your text, I am going to go back to the text, but only to be able to further illustrate some things, and to talk about those things. Like I was just saying, on page 12 of your text, every person in our society is unique. So there are stories for almost everything out there. I mean, you can look around every day, every hour of every day, every person you meet in the grocery store, every person you meet in your classroom, every person has a story. I had a professor in college, I remember, who used to say, in relation to understanding people, even, that every person has an H on their forehead, a H for history. Every person has a history, they have a story. And so as a feature writer, that's actually very exciting as a writer, because you can you can analyze or spin or turn that around to think. You even have the power to make that into, it could be positive, it could be negative, it could be life changing. It's really how you as the writer decide to define that. Now, that comes with responsibility. That's more of the news and ethics part of this, which we're not even getting into yet, and which in your basic news writing classes we got into a lot more. But that's part of the ethics of it. How do you define that? How do you write that? But for this part of it, everybody's unique. So our curiosity as feature writers, as writers, is what really helps us as we get ready to write, as we look for those stories. We're curious about things, about people. Even when an event happens, we're curious. Who did it? Why did they do it? How did it happen? Where did it happen? Um, what are the details of it? And as we begin to think about that, those who are more visual, who think in a more visual way, we're looking for answers visually, vividly. We may go to Google, we may look for details and search for things. that's important. And as we relay those things in our story, we are literally trying to tell our story in a way so that our readers can see it, so they can feel it, so they can smell it, so they can be there. They can walk through that with us or just walk through that. That's an important distinction. You will have in your text several types of stories. Some encourage you, or some are geared towards being a first person type story, told and as told by first person. Some are second person. Some are third person objective. Make sure you know the difference and make sure that your story is consistent. Or if you start out first person and you slip into second person, that you do that purposefully and that there's a departure and that you don't go back and forth unless it's purposeful and unless there's a reason for it. If that's confusing to you, make sure that you read through and you know the difference between saying I and you, and then just referring to that person or that situation. There is a huge difference in person and how you tell that story. That could be one of the biggest differences between a good writer and an excellent and even better writer or a bad writer. Okay, so know that difference. When I began to write professionally, that was one of the first things that tripped me up. And I had to learn that quickly to make that difference. Some of the best feature writing, in my opinion, well, I don't know, there's examples of good writing that starts out with a first person, but then it quickly changes to be third person objective because the story is about that issue, that person. It is not about me. Some of my best writing is not about me. It is about the subject. It's about the person. It's about those veterans. So I never let myself be part of those stories because I'm trying to tell a story about those people and I don't want myself to get in the way. And that's often how I think of it with good feature stories is I don't want myself to get in the way. Now I know there are good feature stories that are like how-to stories. And if you're a firefighter, if you're a cook, if you're and you are wanting to relate to your audience, and so you're writing a good how-to story on something that you're really good at, then you might want to throw in some first-person relational type things. And the book is very clear in helping you to do that. But unless you're the expert in those things, it's very difficult to bring that audience in and help them to relate to you in that. So I've always been more comfortable in promoting that person that I'm doing a feature about for their experience, for their expertise, and writing the feature and making sure that it's about them, not about me. It's more minimizing myself in order to promote that person and let them be the superstar of that feature, if you get my gist. Okay, so outside of curiosity, how do you achieve that? Well, in your writing, you're open, you're alert to your environment. Like on page 13, it talks about only featuring what's clearly observable to other people. They use the example of the writer in the story who might be short, referring to somebody who's 5'8" as tall. Well, in our world, 5'8" would not necessarily be a tall man, but to her, she's short, relatively short. 5'3", I think is what it says. So she's 5'2". She might refer to that person as tall, and yet by all averages, that person is not necessarily tall. So we have to be careful about that, not to cloak things or define things in the way that we necessarily would subjectively, but look more objectively. How would anybody else see that? If I walk into a room, and I do this all the time, and I see that there's, a little bit of a mess over here, or a little bit, oh, the carpet's not quite the color I like, or oh, there's some coffee marks on the table or something. Would I describe that room as filthy or cluttered, or or that carpet's ugly, or disgusting, or whatever, extreme? Well, I might, in my own mind or in my own definition, oh my gosh, your room is absolutely out of order. Now you guys are thinking I'm an ogre. Not really, but I'm using that as an example. Whereas somebody else might say, oh my gosh, this is just daily living. You have coffee rings on the table, or the wallpaper is peeling. Well, that's just a well-used home. That's comfortable. We live in, a humble house. The carpets, I mean, actually, my carpet's really ugly in this room. I don't like it. It's sand colored. It's actually a pretty nice carpet, probably, but I don't like it. So I might say that it's a horrible shade of tan. Well, somebody else, that's subjective. So what is observable? What's objective? It's clearly observable. What's obvious? Well, what's obvious would be that the carpet is smooth. It's a smooth rollout of tan carpet. That's obvious, and that's less subjective. So you have to be careful on that. Now, that doesn't mean your writing should be devoid of some type of passion, or maybe even some type of judgment, but be careful with those judgments, that it's clearly observable and obvious, not maybe something that's really subjective or based on your own kind of bias here. Okay, you also have to have a solid knowledge of the language. This is where your adjectives, your metaphors, your alliteration, your similes, your personification. You need to have a solid grasp of the language. And if you don't, use your thesaurus. Look things up. Okay, don't use the same word twice. Simply don't use the same word twice. There was an instance. What was I writing? Oh, I just did an entry on Facebook describing an interaction with my husband, my aunt, a dramatic situation that happened yesterday at emergency room hospital. And so it's kind of an ongoing saga that I'm having with an elderly aunt. I'm taking care of her. I'm her guardian. And so I was describing for my friends, family, readers, what was happening. And so I found myself using the word encouraging or support or something a few times. And I thought, I need to use another word. It's absolutely true. You need to use different words. How can you say support differently? Encouragement. You can say encouragement one time, support the other time, uplifted me. You can say, and I'm saying you could say things in various ways. You could one time say I ran to grab a book. I obtained a magazine. Look for various words. One of my biggest supporters, my mentor, who taught me how to write, told me that she read through my articles as I became a newspaper editor and was thrilled to find that I had used different adjectives to describe things, that I regularly did not use the same word over and over. And honestly, I don't ever remember her telling me or advising me not to do that. So I was thrilled when she told me that. And I'm looking around to see how long this video is going. Ooh, 14 minutes. Okay, so we need to move on. I really like this one paragraph, so I'm going to read it aloud from your textbook so that you don't miss it. I would like you to asterisk it, or if you're going to sell your textbook back, which I don't advise at this point, but go ahead if you want to. Copy it somewhere. Paste this up on your CPU, your computer monitor, somewhere you can see this paragraph. A wordsmith cares about each word and knows the value of compositional techniques such as the simile and the metaphor, alliteration and personification. A wordsmith labors over each word, frequently turns to a thesaurus, and chooses a word the way a shopper selects a golden onion at the supermarket. I think that's an interesting choice of words for college students. How many of you go to the supermarket and look for a golden onion? Most of us look for a 3-pound or 5-pound bag right now. Make sure nothing's rotting and pick it up and go. Well, that's me because I'm not a college student. But maybe you look around for this golden onion or you look around for the perfect apple. What do you do? I don't know. If you're in the brush section, and I'm not trying to be sexist or anything here or belittle it, but do you look for the perfect brush for your hair? Look for the perfect shampoo. Guys, do you look for the perfect, I don't know. Let's don't be gender specific here. Maybe that's why they picked onions. Anybody that looks around for the perfect anything. If you have a choice of things that you're going to purchase, do you look for the perfect one? That's the same thing that we should do as writers. If you're working with words, look for the perfect word. Look for the perfect fit. If you're a wordsmith, you're looking, and a wordsmith would be a writer, a person who really cares about what they're writing, a person who doesn't just throw the words on the page, who's not just trying to get this assignment over with. You're actually looking and weighing for how and what the effectiveness of each word, especially, and I shouldn't say especially the lead, but yes, especially the lead. That's your bait, that's your hook, that's what you're throwing out there for people to want to keep reading. But in addition to that, as you reel in the reader, each paragraph then afterwards, each subsequently, and then at the end, you're also leaving people something to think about. So actually every word in that story is important. So you want to weigh every word. That's why when I talked about looking up those details in my introductory video to you, all that research that you put into a story, all of that's very important. Okay, but the good part about that is at the end of chapter 1, there's another paragraph. It says, for the most part, these qualities are not inherited. You guys have a lot of Pulitzer Prize winning stories in this book. If there's one fault I can find in this book, I don't ever think that there's anything wrong in looking at the very best to compare. Of course, you want to compare yourself to the best. You want to look at the best as an example to emulate what you should be able to write. But I also think that sometimes by comparing yourself to Pulitzer Prize winners, you might think, oh, I could never obtain that. That's not necessarily true. So don't let that throw you off, okay? But these qualities, this is the point here, these qualities are not inherited. Good writing is not inherited. They're learned. They're cultivated. Most of these Pulitzer Prize winners would say are gleaned. These people would tell you they're gleaned from trial and error. Trial and error. You have to keep trying. Try and try and try and try. But they're truly present in all good feature writers. So all of these things that you're learning, good feature writers will tell you this is what it takes to be a good feature writer. You can't do it without doing these things, without being curious, without paying attention, without looking for the details, without being curious, without stopping to think, am I just saying that because of my comparison, because I think that's ugly, because I'm holding them up to my standard? Okay. Am I not going a step further because I have a friend who did a wonderful documentary on the Ku Klux Klan. Oh my gosh, he had to become friends with these people. He is one of the most fair, loving, non-racist people that I know. He lives in Gulfport, Mississippi. Oh my gosh. He did a documentary on the Ku Klux Klan. He had to eat with these people, talk with these people, be friendly to these people, in order to photograph them, to get into their minds, to learn what their views were like, to get them to trust him. Yes. So he had to have some genuine empathy at some point, some way to connect in order to get this documentary to show how they think, who they are, to be able to do this documentary, to inform the rest of us. Yeah, that was tough. That was really tough. So sometimes we have to get out of our own skin and be able to cover, to relate to shake hands with, to talk to do interviews with people we don't like, people whose ideas we don't agree with, to get a good story, not just for the purpose of getting a good story, though, to inform others, to get to the heart of the issue. So do we just, get our back up ahead of time and say, these are the only people that I'm going to cover, the only stories that I'm going to tell are stories that I like, people that I like, things that I agree with? No, we can't do that. That's not the point. The point is, and that's all too often what's happening, honestly, in our world today, which is why sometimes the things that need to be covered don't get covered, or they don't get covered fairly, is because reporters take this attitude that, they're somehow above the fray or something, that they don't have to delve into these things. But okay, so that's beside the point. I wanted to very quickly, get to this point that I had already mentioned in my previous video, that more and more so, feature writing is the basis for what people really read, even in magazine or even in newspapers. So whereas feature writing, good feature writing, used to be kind of the purview of magazines, newspapers are really more often than not making it their livelihood anymore. Yes, they still produce news, but good newspapers, more and more so, are looking like magazines, especially internet-based newspapers. If you don't have good features, or good news features even, news stories that are written more like a feature story, then they're not successful. So it's just good to remember that the lines are very blurred right now. With that said, I wanted to draw your attention to two articles that I will, as I send you this video out, I'm going to send you a link to these articles that are incredibly important. And then I'm going to send you a link to what's called the Essential California. It is a new kind of magazine that's sent out via email to subscribers of the LA Times. Very interesting. It gives links back to the LA Times, and they're starting to run feature article series in this subscription-based newsletter that links back to the LA Times. It's very interesting, and the way they keep their readers coming is by giving them articles, a series, and capturing their interest that way. So, and they are feature articles. So that's how they got me starting to read it. So it's called the Essential California, that's sent out by the LA Times. So I'm going to give you links to all of those. But the first article that I want to draw your attention to is produced by The Atlantic, a very good magazine that I get. One of my colleagues actually writes for The Atlantic. He teaches at Indiana University, Peter Jacoby, a longtime professor there. Anyway, the article is called How Helicopter Parents Cause Binge Drinking. Something your text notes. Very interesting. When feature articles are packaged for magazine, sometimes they're packaged differently for print and differently for online. The one I'm going to send you is actually titled How Helicopter Parenting Can Cause Binge Drinking. The print edition actually says how helicopter parents cause binge drinking. So in this article, or this headline, it says they cause it. In the online article, it says they can cause it. Very interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's almost two different meanings, but really, the assertion here is that this is shortened, takes the word can out, because of space. The online article simply puts the word can back in, but the subhead is also different in the online article. The subhead says, the way some white professionals raise their children is exacerbating an alcohol problem on U.S. college campuses. Well, look at this headline, or subhead. The parenting style of some white professionals is propelling the alcohol problem on college campuses. You have to wonder, there's a subtle difference in the meaning here. Is it because of space? Or is it simply that they want to perpetuate a different subtle meaning here with print readers who the Atlantic are going to ascertain are going to be older, because the assertion is that print readers are older by definition than online readers. So are they going to ascertain that print readers are going to be older, and so they're going to more identify with this subhead and this headline than are the younger readers who are going to read the online edition? I think it's worthy of thinking about and worthy of discussion. The article, pretty much that I can tell, is pretty much the same online and in print. At least a casual reading has told me that. The article itself is definitely worth reading. I would look through it carefully. It starts out with a first-person connection. I was a teenager. It quickly goes to a third-person discussion of the issues, and even a second to third person discussion of the issues. It is very open and honest about the drinking on college campuses today versus years ago, and the writer's assertion of what the effects have been and why binge drinking is such a problem now. So I think it's actually a very, very well-written article, and very bold article, if I must say, about binge drinking on college campuses. I would highly recommend that you pay close attention to how this article is written, because this is by no means, The Atlantic is by no means a conservative publication. And so I was actually pretty shocked to read it. Because it comes up with some pretty startling conclusions. Now, I want to direct your attention to another, what I consider very well-written article. And what's interesting is I could flip through both of these magazines, and these were the only articles that caught my attention, really, that I would read with any depth. The other articles I kind of flipped through, but this was the latest Atlantic magazine that just came in. It's a September issue. And this is the latest Forbes magazine that just came in. And why do I read these? Because I'm interested. I also have my own business, so I read Forbes. So Forbes, this is a special issue of Forbes that just came in. It talks about the most innovative companies in America. Here we go. Well, actually in the world, because Forbes covers the world. And there's an article called Nonstop Benioff. Well, Benioff is the CEO and creator of Salesforce. And my daughter is pretty much a Salesforce expert. She got her MBA, and so she has been to Salesforce, one of these conventions that it talks about in San Francisco. So I was reading this article and I thought, wow, this is really a great example. Even the picture of a really good news, a really good magazine story. It's written as a really good magazine feature in a business magazine, in Forbes no less. And I really like the lead in this story. Salesforce co-founder Mark Benioff spends several months a year in Hawaii, where he owns a sweeping beachfront house on the Big Island, and pals around with billionaire Michael Dow and aging rock star Neil Young. Little surprise then that for a retreat with 400 of his top executives in August, he has summoned them to an air-conditioned ballroom near the white sands and volcanic cliffs down the shore. Now, either this person traveled there and observed all this, or he did some really good homework on Google and looked all of this up and asked some questions, which is not far-fetched. He would have to have done some of this to know that there's some white sand, there's some volcanic cliffs just down the shore. He had 400 of his executives in that ballroom. And this would have been outside of that interview because he's not going to ask Benioff to describe all of this in detail. And then this graph, which is the very second paragraph, which is very revealing. Well, I'm showing you this, but I'm not. There's the second graph. Go close into it. Right before that third graph where it quotes him, which is very important to start quoting somebody pretty quickly if you're going to write a feature about them. In this expected venue, an unexpected scene plays out. That's a really good play on words. In this expected venue, an unexpected scene plays out. Benioff, his massive, and see why you have to know English? In this expected venue, an unexpected scene plays out, Benioff, his massive 6'5" build wrapped in a Hawaiian shirt patterned with blue palm trees. That's a wonderful description. His head topped with a Mauna Kea, I said that wrong, I'm sure, baseball cap, begins speaking to his co-founder in German. That's wonderful. And then, ya, Benioff grins. How unique for the writer to have sat there patiently, and now I know this is in person, and picked up on this. So instead of just waiting and only quoting the answers to his questions, okay, the interviewer is aware of everything going on. Not just, I'm asking you this question. You're giving me this answer. I'm asking you this question. You're giving me this answer. And I'm just not going to pay attention to the children running around the room, or your coworker that comes in and out, or this person whispering in your ear. No, if you're writing a feature story, all of that is up for grabs. Doesn't mean you're going to include all of that. Doesn't mean you're going to go chronological even. But all of that, any of that is up for grabs. The picture on the wall and back of the person. You know, if this is a world-class golfer and he happens to have a picture of, I don't know, who's another world-class golfer, you know, on the wall, and then during the interview at some point or after the interview, you ask him about it and you find out that that is like his most prized possession, then you might insert that somewhere in the story, or you might even start with that in the story. That's the point of a good feature story, is that you can observe everything else going on. You can look at, if you were going to write a story about me, you might ascertain just from my background that my family is very important to me. Look at those pictures. There's my son and my daughter. Okay, there's my son and my daughter. There's my son, my daughter, my daughter-in-law, my grandson. Now, if you really were to do if I were better grandma right now, I would have pictures of all 6 of my grandkids in back of me. I didn't even talk about them, did I, when I did my intro? I should have, because they're very big and important part of my life. You would ask me what that gavel is for over there. You know, I mean, there's things that you would pick up from a background. And that's all fair game when you're interviewing somebody for a feature story, or when you're observing during your interview, or when you're walking into their building or into their house, which you should try to do. I remember that Peter Jacoby, the gentleman I was telling you about that writes for The Atlantic and teaches at IU, he was talking about an interview before that he had with Macaulay Culkin. And he said he spent like a week there at Macaulay Culkin's house interviewing him. And it's not like he interviewed him day in, day out, but he interviewed him like maybe a couple of hours. But the big thing that he did was just observe. Just observe. Just watch it. Just be around. Just show up in the morning and then be around and watch him as he played with his, I don't know, brothers and sisters, and just as he interacted, and just watched, kind of a day in the life, went over to the ball field, watched him play ball. But that's how you get to know um, a person. That's how you get to be observant about their life. I did a feature once on, a kind of a day in the life of a Vietnam decorated veteran who became the elected president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And I actually rode in an airplane, a 6-seater, flew from Greensboro, North Carolina to Asheville, North Carolina, spent a day running around going to different churches, actually a couple of days, and just this exhausting schedule of him preaching and talking to people and running around in this airplane and eating lunch. And oh my goodness, it was just exhausting. But it gave me insight into how he related to people and what he did. And, I was able to take pictures and listen in on some of his conversations and report on, what he talked about at his meetings and that sort of thing. And it's fascinating. And that's the kind of thing you can do in a feature story versus, say, a straight news story. Okay, so enough of that. So I'm going to send you links to both of those stories, and then to that Essential California LA Times. Also in the Benioff story, I want to go back for 1 second, and then I promise I'm finished. There is a ton of researched information that is critical to this story that is in a business magazine. Things about millions of dollars, the acquisition of other businesses, the just a ton of background that is critically important, that you would not be able to publish a story without having all of this. Do you depend on the person that you are interviewing to give you all of this? No, this is stuff that you do on your own. Just like when I went to Iraq, when I went to Jordan, it was painful, but I spent days and days of research looking up just the spellings of names, the number of years this place has become a country, how long has it had a university. There is a lot of research that goes into good feature writing. For World War II, I had to look up Patton and how long was he in Africa, and Patton's troops, and what were the likelihoods that an army person could have dove under bullets, and how were those interactions. And this person had told me that he was on a train that went through the mountains. He was transported after he was caught. Okay, the train that it went from here to there. Did it go from Austria to Germany? And how long would that have taken? 2 days, 3 days? So there's a lot of research that goes into good feature writing. Make sure you do it, because your stories will show, and you'll be able to tell in your feature stories whether or not you did that research by how believable they are, and how much you really care about getting things right, and your credibility depends on it. So, okay, well, have fun, and good writing and good research. And I am going to tell you, because of this textbook difficulty, you have until Monday night to actually complete your work this time, instead of Sunday night. And if you still have a difficulty because of the textbook situation, let me know, and we'll work that out. And I apologize profusely for that. It was something that was built into the program, and until students started to go to the bookstore, and even then,